In this episode, you'll hear real stories of two tax professionals in relation to tax advice, how they're involved in it, what they find difficult, what they've done to get better, and tips to help you improve. You're listening to episode 83 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast to help you to progress, develop, and improve your tax career.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode. Tax advice. It's one of those things that many of us want to be involved in as a tax professional. But it's not straightforward work, and it can be hard to get your foot in the door. In this episode, we are joined by two people who have recently attended my first tax advice masterclass. Chrissie is an accounts and tax manager at PBA Accountants, and Brandon Smith is an assistant tax manager at Botham Accounting. They're joining us to share their stories in relation to tax advice, including their challenges, what they've done to get better, and their tips to help you to improve. You'll also hear a bit about their backgrounds in tax too, and the journey they've been on so far. Tax advice is much more complicated than just giving the tax answer, and every client situation is different. Most of the time, the drivers for your clients are something other than tax too, and tax is just a side effect of that. I got involved in advisory work very early on in my career due to working in employment taxes, and I probably thought that back then I could provide good advice when all I would really provide is tax information. Learning to be good at providing advice can be a game changer for your tax career. It means you'll become a more valuable and trusted advisor. It means you can help clients better. It means you are more likely to get repeat customs from clients. And if you want to be involved in advisory work, or if you have already started to be involved, it's never too early to start getting better at this skill. The key aim behind the Tax Advice Masterclass is to help you and other tax professionals to accelerate that learning journey and become a better tax advisor quicker than you otherwise would. Thank you to both Chrissie and Brandon, who have given up their time to help me in this episode and to help me spread the word about the Tax Advice Masterclass that is now open for anyone to enrol onto. Head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses for more information on the masterclass and how to enrol. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses. The next tax advice masterclass is in November this year, November 2023. All the links mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP83. And TTPP83 just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, episode 83. Timings for each person's segment and each of the topic areas within that segment can be found in the details section of this episode within your podcast player, or by heading on over to the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP83. First up in this episode is Chrissie. You'll hear her talk about how she's moved from accounting work to tax work and how that's been a steep learning curve, particularly in relation to providing tax advice. She's been wanting to get better to make sure that she's doing a good job for her clients and giving them a good service. You'll hear what's really helped her to get better at providing tax advice more recently, along with her tips to help you too. Just one more thing before we jump into the episode. If, like me, you're interested in knowing what you're worth in terms of salary, then get in touch with James from the tax recruitment company to benchmark what you're currently on. From his interaction with many different businesses and tax professionals, he has current knowledge of salary rates based on experience and specialism. Speaking with James could help you to negotiate a pay rise or determine it's time to find a new role. Contact details for James can be found in the show notes for this episode, thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP83, or you can book a chat with him by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. So get in contact with James to benchmark your salary or to discuss potentially available roles, particularly if you work in corporation tax, as he is currently recruiting for many roles in this area. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. If you don't mind then, Chrissie, do you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction about you, kind of where you're at with your tax career and so on?
Yep. So I initially started with studying ACCA. So I got that qualification. It did take me a bit longer than I'd like to admit, but then I had a little tiny break and then I moved into the Chartered Tax Advisor qualification. So I completed that. I think that must have been about 3 years ago. I think I completed that. I've been working in tax for about 5 years, whereas predominantly before it was accounts and VAT and that kind of thing. But then one of the managers who was in the tax department, he retired, and then he was trying to go around and recruit everyone. And I put my hand up and I was like, yeah, I'll give that a go.
Yeah.
That's where I've got to now. So I'm actually one of the tax managers in the firm. There's just a small department because we're quite a small firm. So yeah, that's where I am currently.
Yeah. I didn't know you started in accounts, actually. That must be, I mean, the compliance stuff in accounts and the compliance of an accounts is quite similar, right? But tax advice is like a completely different ballgame, isn't it?
100%. And with accounts, once you know how to do accounts, you kind of know, and you can fairly easily sort of process your way through it because it is more of a process. Obviously, there are rules and things like that you've got to follow. But yeah, tax is like a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
You just can't know everything, and you will never know everything. So I think that's what interested me a bit, because I have a tendency where I kind of like to do new things, and I'm always want to learn something new and carry on. And that's why I carried on studying, but I'm not going to carry on anymore. No more exams. But yeah, so that's what interested me really with moving more into tax. I do still have a hand in accounts because I have my own portfolio of clients. So I still get involved in reviewing accounts and that kind of stuff. But yeah, tax is where it's at, I think, for me at the moment.
How did you start getting involved in advisory work and that type of thing? Then do you do much of it now? Is it mainly compliance on the tax side? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so we have a fair bit of compliance. We mail with compliance, but I think more and more recently, a lot of people are coming to us maybe as the clients get a bit older and you've worked with them for a while, that they want sort of inheritance tax planning or some tax advice. We generally deal advice sort of with capital gains tax and, let's say, inheritance tax planning from that perspective. I think with the introduction potentially of MTD, that I think tax advice is going to be more valuable than actually just the compliance side, because everyone can do it themselves. So.
Yeah. And you can't really automate advice, can you? Because you probably know what it's like now with just a bit of experience in it. Like two clients that look seemingly similar, the advice can look completely different, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it depends what they else or their personal circumstances. So you can kind of never potentially give the same two bits of advice that to two different people.
Yeah, exactly. So then for you, like, what's your part in the advice? Because do you have to report into, say, a director or senior manager, or do you kind of have the final sign off on advice? Now you're at manager grade. How does that work?
So generally will be me that will prepare certain advice, but it does get always reviewed by a director just for that second view and overcast of the work. But yeah, I generally prepares, well, and my colleagues, but specifically for work that I'm doing, it will be me putting it all together, planning it and drafting.
What parts of doing that kind of element, then doing the drafting, pulling the advice together, which bits of that do you think are the most difficult for you, at least?
I think making a plan, knowing how to structure the advice, especially if you've got to cover multiple taxes or multiple scenarios, it can be a bit tricky to know, well, should I do one scenario and cover all the taxes for that scenario, or do I cover both scenarios under tax headings? I find that tricky. And just, I have a tendency sometimes to hide behind emails, and you just can't get the info necessarily that you need from the client when you hide behind an email. So I think for me, that's something that I've kind of taken on board a little bit more recently, that you just can't actually be talking to someone to get the advice, because that's, I think, where I was falling down a little bit before. You'd kind of be not necessarily have enough information to say, yes, you should do this, or I advise you would do that, because you think, well, you could do this, or you could do that, but potentially I haven't got that extra bit of information that I'd need to say definitively.
Yeah, so then you end up having too many options. You can't give them concrete answers, etc. Yeah,
and trying to be succinct with that, it's just not possible.
So for you then, like the key to solving that has almost been just to speak to them, like on the phone or Teams or face to face. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And from doing your masterclass as well, probably have been guilty in the past of quoting the legislation. I'm like, the client, it's hard enough to understand as a tax advisor what some of the legislation said. So, I mean, trying to expect someone else to pick that up and potentially guilty of putting too much information in there and trying to get the balance right between enough and too much.
It's tempting though, isn't it? Because I suppose imagine the scenario where you're advising, say, a corporation tax advisor, but you advise them in relation to some personal tax stuff. You could probably get away with some legislation references and maybe a quote here and there because they're going to understand that type of stuff and probably be interested in it.
Yeah.
But your normal lay client that's a business owner and they've never really touched tax in their life, they've always outsourced it, they're just not going to care, are they?
Yeah. It's like I pay you to work out what that means.
Do it for me.
For me.
Yeah, clients hate it when you go to them and say something like, "Oh, well, this is the sentence that's ambiguous. Make your decision." And they're like, "Well, why can't you make the decision for me, right?"
Can you just tell me what's best? Tell me what's best out of that, pros and cons.
Yeah.
So, I think that's definitely a learning curve.
Do you feel like there's been a change from when you started giving tax advice then to now? If you can cast your mind back to when you first started, what were some of the big mistakes you think you were making?
Yeah, I think potentially trying to cram everything in and not organizing it either. So jumping between one subject to another. And to be honest, because I'd never thought before about using like a report separate from an email or a letter, like it's always the kind of way that it's been done. And I find if you use email, sometimes it gets so long, people are probably bored of reading it, and really you write it as if you're thinking it and it just all comes out on the page. And I think that's a more not as good. I think that's what I've learned now, that there are other options. You don't have to just because someone emailed you, you don't have to just try and fit it all in. Yeah. And
something I've been trying more recently is to have the headlines in the email. So you might say something like inclusion. Here's the backing information if you want to take a look at it, because then client gets the thing that's straight to the point. They can then go check if they want to, and if they don't, it's kind of their fault for not doing it. But at least then you've done your job. It's down to them then to do theirs, isn't it? I suppose their side of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip actually from your masterclass that I picked up on.
Do you find actually when you write in emails though, I definitely find this. I can write an email though, say if for some reason I was writing a 1,000-word email, which is probably not going to happen, but if I was, I would write that much quicker than I would write 1,000 words in a report. I just find it easier to start typing straight away in response to an email than I do on a blank page in a report, which is odd in a way.
Yeah, I think it's because we're so used to emails. It's like they're so instant and you've always on emails and replying. So I think you get more into the flow, whereas because you don't think, oh, actually, I should make a plan for this, or I'll just go straight in.
I suppose you start by saying, "Hi, hope you're well," which is just the common thing you always do. You've already got some words on the page then, and then you can just carry on, can't you?
Whereas, real.
When it comes to like reports and stuff as well, if we haven't got like a template, nice thing to look at, I can spend ages just messing with the format before I even put any words on the page, really, just to make it look nice. Which I know is not a good use of time.
You get distracted, don't you? It's
absolutely
quite easy to
the easy way to procrastinate is to just make it look nice, because that's easy. Writing the advice is more difficult.
And you feel like you've achieved a little bit of something.
Exactly. What do you think then made you want to get better at advice? It sounds like you like learning, so that's probably one side of it, right? But like, really, what do you think are the reasons you really wanted to get good at giving advice?
I think as you essentially take on your own client, get further along in your career, you're the one who they come to, and you don't want to get things wrong for them, and you don't want to have to be the person that, you're the one that they see and they'll say, you did this. And you have to take the responsibility for it, which is good, but that kind of makes you want to get better and not let them down. Like, you don't want to lose that trust with your relationships, because you start building your relationships and you want them to refer you to other people and you want to build up your client base. And I think that suits me as well. I just don't want to be in that position where I've got something wrong or not done the best job that I can do, because they do start thinking, oh, well, that makes out the best for me, or they lose the trust if you have to go back and say, oh, sorry.
Yeah. And sometimes you could be like, right, couldn't you? And you could write something that's correct.
Yeah.
But if you just wrote it in the wrong tone or the wrong style, even that can upset a client, can't it? Depends on who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, with emails, you can't get a tone from an email, can you? Or you can't necessarily explain things as well as you would like. Or if you're in person, you can expand on that, or they might misinterpret what you've said in an email. So yeah, I think that's one of the main things.
It sounds like you're just very keen on doing a good job, I suppose. So anything you can do to improve that, you want to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a good thing to do. I found this more with junior people who are new into tax. Like, they don't seem to necessarily have that as much early in their career, like thinking, oh, I just want to do a good job of everything. It's just, oh, I'm a trainee, I'm here to learn. It doesn't matter whether my work's good or bad.
Yeah,
But
it's going to be reviewed by someone else.
Exactly.
They'll pick up my mistakes.
The person that's responsible for you getting promotions, probably, and he's going to give you feedback in your reviews, etc.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely guilty of that. I think when you're earlier in your career, because you think, oh, someone's going to review that and they'll pick up what I've done, or I've done something wrong, and it's the onus is on them sort of to potentially pick that up. Whereas when you get further on, you look back and you think, oh, this is why people get annoyed.
Yeah. This is interesting, actually. So it sounds like you think you were that person then earlier on in your career, sometimes anyway.
Yeah,
What was
potentially.
what was the thing that changed it for you, do you think, then, so that you stopped having that kind of thought process?
I think like preparing accounts, when I was back doing that, there was the tendency that sometimes you could get a little bit lazy because you knew it was going to be reviewed, and until you're the one that starts reviewing people's work, and then you realize, this is why you get the review points. This is why you keep repeating the same mistakes, because you don't necessarily appreciate the reviewer's job. And I think, yeah, that's probably what changed it for me when I started reviewing other people's work and started taking on my own work. That definitely changed it.
It's interesting saying that, actually, because obviously in the masterclass, that's very much what I've kind of said is one of the parts, wasn't it, about making it as easy as possible for that reviewer for you.
Yes.
So I don't know how many people would have taken on board what I said there, but that could really like speed up your progression, make you get better quicker as well, right? Because if you're just doing something thinking, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll change it, you're not getting as much learning out of that as what you would if you tried to do it perfect first time and then have the feedback of changes, right?
Agree. Yeah. I think feedback is really, really important, but you want to do it, like say, you want to do as good a job as you can at the draft stage and learn from the feedback that comes, and hopefully not make the same mistake or have the same feedback going forward. Really, that's kind of the aim, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So how many years do you think you've been giving tax advice for then, though? Because it sounds like you wouldn't have done that straight away when you moved into tax.
No, so it's mainly just compliance. So I'd say probably for the past couple of years, it seems to be, it just seems to be that there is more people coming to us for tax advice, but maybe I didn't see it so much before. But yeah, so probably the last 2, 3 years, I'd say.
Over that full time then, what do you think are like the key things that you've done to try and get better at giving the advice?
I think definitely pin up with your professional development courses and reading, and millions of emails that come through that have tax cases and stuff like that. I think that can be, you don't want to get bogged down in it, but it's definitely helpful, because you might come across something later on and you'd be like, oh, I saw an article about that, or I know that I need to go and look into that, or a certain area. And I think that it's definitely something that helps me, because I'm quite nosy. So I usually like pick things up on that. Obviously take class, which is something that I did to try and get better, which was really helpful, and ask for feedback as well, because maybe then someone else amends it for you, or it just goes straight out the door. But I think asking for actual feedback on the work that you're doing is, how to learn, and just speaking to clients more.
Yeah, to understand them better. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just, picking up the phone or having a meeting, because you always find out extra information than you think you're going to, or that they say they haven't done something, and then further on in the conversation,
Yeah.
oh, but I did do this, or I do have that.
Yeah. think when you talk to them as well, I think that gives you a better appreciation for their position, because it's very easy for us as tax advisors to get so focused on the tax, particularly when we first start providing advice. And I think when you have those conversations with them, you kind of appreciate their perspective more. It's not all about tax advice to them. They've got a business that they need to run and the tax needs to complement it. Or if you're in personal tax, then it might be something different. Maybe they've got a family thing that they're trying to set up so that their kids or something can have it's not just about what's the best way for them to reduce tax right now necessarily, or even reduce tax at all. It's understanding how it fits into their goals, their objectives, I suppose.
Yeah, because you want to advise them on the best course of action, but if it's going to clash with something that's potentially not to do with the tax effect or anything like that, then you need to know that, and you're probably not going to pick that up unless you've had that conversation, because they probably just wouldn't drop it into an email.
No, people don't, do they? And do you find as well, actually, because again, I find this anyway, the more you speak to someone, the better you know them, the more information they share with you, so the better advice you can give them.
Yeah, definitely. I had a potential new client meet on Zoom, and she just said that hadn't sold any shares. And a bit later on in the conversation, it was like, but apart from the 8 that I sold the other month. And then I think, well, if that was an email, she would have said, I haven't sold any shares, because that's initially further on in the conversation. It was like, but apart from those 8 that I sold the other months, just to see what it was like. And
this is one of the most frustrating being an advisor. It's just sometimes, because they don't really, their day-to-day thing isn't the tax stuff, is it? Like, no. They might not even, when she said to you no there first, she probably thought the answer was no, I've not sold any shares. And then she's only remembered 20 minutes later or whenever it was that she actually did. And you say an email, they would spend 5 minutes drafting the email back to you, then they'd leave it. They're not going to have that time, are they, to think about
exactly
that other thing. Yeah, interesting. I know you said you're working on picking up the phone more than to get to know them better. Would you say there's any other aspects that you're working on, particularly related to tax advice?
I think coming back to, if I'd written something like recent piece of work that actually landed in my lap after your masterclass, which was quite helpful because I could put into practice some of the things that I'd learned, is coming back to it with fresh eyes. You can get so bogged down when you're in the midst of writing something or trying to think of all the tax advice, that just come back the next day and look at it again and reread it, so that you've got the fresh eyes, you've got the fresh think. It can be a bit overwhelming when you're trying to write stuff. So I think that's definitely helped me. And that's what I did with this recent piece of work. And I think I then thought, actually, that's not right. That doesn't make sense.
So you actually put it down and left it for came back the next day, basically. Yeah. It's amazing how much of a difference that can make, honestly. Like, I can write something one day, think, that's all right, that, and you read it next day, like, did I really think that was good yesterday?
Who wrote this? It wasn't me.
And clearly it was me. Yeah, that happens, doesn't it? It's just you get so bogged down in it sometimes, and you start getting tired. The more you write, the tired you get. I'm not a natural writer, so it really drains me mentally as well. So I need that break to come back fresh.
Yeah, definitely, because it can be overwhelming, especially when you're trying to think about multiple things, and then you probably come up with some fresh bits of information or something that you hadn't thought of the day before because you were so focused on one specific aspect.
Yeah, and that's why I'm quite a fan, to be fair, of trying to break it down into steps, which is before you even start writing the advice, thinking about what the advice is that you actually want to say, because then at each stage you're not trying to do too many things at once. I know you always end up having to flip back and forth between them a bit. It's just the way that it's happened. But the more I think you can box it up into different categories, the easier it becomes overall.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever sat down and made a plan for advice that I've been given until having, doing a masterclass. And with this recent piece of work, I actually sat down and I thought, right, I'm gonna make a plan. I'm gonna try and put some headings in and work from there. And actually, things seem to flow a lot easier because it was broken down and I could focus on each bit. Actually, it took me a bit of time to work out what I wanted the headings to be, but
yeah, well, you probably changed it 16 times until you got the exact right word in. Yeah, but at least you had an idea, even if you didn't have the heading wordings correct at the start. You kind of knew the gist of what was going in each section. I'm guessing at that point it gives the direction, doesn't it, and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of it. I used to hate planning as well. I remember particularly in GCSE English, which was a long time ago now for me. but like they were saying to plan for that, and I just couldn't
Yeah.
or didn't want
I
to.
don't know what I'm writing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I just jump in, start writing straight away. It's only really since I've been working in tax, I'd say, that I've started planning.
Yeah.
Probably CTA exams started me doing that, to be fair, because you can't really get away, particularly for the what's now the APS. I don't know what it was called when you did it, but it was the APS paper when I did it. It's the written one at the end where you're giving like advice and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one was where I first started really planning properly. But saying that, even when I actually did the exam, I started doing my plan and then I just scrapped it and just did it anyway, which is like a recipe for failure. But somehow I still managed to pass that one. But yeah,
Oh,
I do
phew.
plan a lot. Yeah, I do plan a lot now, to be fair, and not even spend ages on it. But like every time I'm about to write something that's more than like 1 page of A4. Get the thoughts down
Yeah.
first and then just write it. People think I used to think this anyway. I used to think it would take me longer if I sit there and write a plan, because obviously you're writing a plan and then you're writing it. But I've found that that's just completely not true. 'Cause you
Actually makes it a bit quicker, doesn't it? I think.
Absolutely. Because you're not there thinking then, what am I going to write next? You already kind of have an idea of what you want to write next. I used to take ages. Like I wrote like a paragraph. I'd be then thinking for 3 minutes, what do I want to write in the next paragraph? Then I'd write it and then just keep doing that. Whereas with a plan, I find I don't do that half as much.
Also, I'm quite forgetful sometimes. So I'll think of something and then I'll be like, oh, remember that for later. Like if I've
And
not
then
written a
you
plan.
don't.
But
Yeah.
so it's actually quite helpful when you write the plan to think, oh, I'll think of that. I'll note that down under the next heading before, if I haven't finished the other one.
Yeah. Because our brain doesn't just bring the information we want when we want it, does it necessarily? It just tells us at the wrong time.
Yeah. Oh, stop thinking about that thing. I'm trying to concentrate on this.
Yeah. To be fair, all I've started doing for that is I'll just whack it where I'm writing it at the time before I lose it. I know it's just plonked there, but at least it's captured and I can move it later.
Yeah.
I do wonder sometimes actually what it used to be like when you had typewriters and no computers, because obviously you can't do that. Can you? You wouldn't be able to change things and move it around like we've
just
got.
pop it on the edge of the sheet and then you have to retype everything.
Exactly. Just one letter wrong, you might have to retype a whole piece of advice. Or at least a whole page anyway. Have you got any kind of final tips that you'd like to leave people that would help them improve their advisory scores?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before that I'm quite nosy, and I think being nosy and listening to other people's conversations, as in on the phone, not eavesdropping in there.
Yeah, not putting your ear next to the window.
Yeah. But if you've got the opportunity, like we have an open plan office, so it's quite easy to overhear people's phone calls with clients, and you pick up little tips or bits of advice, and then you can kind of ask them about it afterwards and be like, oh, why did you say that? Or what was that in reference to? Or even if you can get invited into a meeting with a client to sit there and observe with your director or manager or someone, because you can learn quite a lot from that. Yeah, I think that's one of the main things. And just making sure that you do keep up to date with your professional development and putting your nose in. So I'm not sure, because with CCA, you have to do a certain amount of hours. You have to do 40 hours a year. I'm not sure that there's the same defined hours that you have to do for CTA. Is there?
No, there's not at the moment anyway. Yeah. It's something like do what you need to do. It's relevant for your role.
Yeah.
Which is obviously hairy-fairy, but yeah, you still need to keep up with it.
Do what you need to do. But yeah, I think that is quite important to keep up to date with what's going on, because tax changes so often.
Yeah. And if you don't keep up with it, then you can easily miss a point, I suppose, when you're giving that piece of advice. If you're up to date and you're seeing things regularly, you might think, I saw that the other day, that could help this client. And you can't do that, can you, without it? But I did like the point anyway about like understanding, you didn't say it in this way, but you said like when people are on the phone and you ask them like why they said something, I think the why element is the most important. It's not really what they did, because one day they might do a different what to another, because in their head there's a different why behind it. So yeah, I think that's a nice one, is understand why they did something, because then you can really appreciate what they did, I suppose.
Yeah, what circumstances that might apply and why and why. Also, if you've got the option to run stuff past your colleagues, I think we lose that when you work from home. But when you're in the office, it's quite nice to have that conversation with other people and be like, what do you think about this? Or bounce ideas off each other. And you kind of miss that a little bit when you're working from home and you want that feedback, or they've got an idea that you might not have thought of. And I think that's quite invaluable as well, if you've got the option to bounce ideas off other people.
Absolutely. For anyone that's out there that's thinking, oh, the masterclass sounds like, oh, it might be interesting, but I'm not sure whether it's for me. Have you got anything you'd like to say to them that, about how you found it, etc.?
Yeah, I think 100% it is for anyone giving tax advice. I don't think it really matters where you kind of are in your career, because I don't think you can ever learn too much. I think that probably makes me sound like a geek, but I think you always pick up something new, but it may be something you've never thought of, or you think, oh, I don't actually do that, but that might make it more efficient for me. Like making a plan, for example, I never did that, and that made my piece of advice more efficient. And especially if you're just starting out giving advice, I think it's a well-structured course, and it gives you some good markers for how to make your advice better and things to focus on, because you can just get bogged down in trying to write a massive long essay like you're doing an exam. Because that's probably what you've done. If you're just starting
Yeah.
out, you've just done exam questions and written as much as you can under time pressure. So yeah, I definitely think that everyone would get something out of it if you're giving tax advice.
Just a reminder to benchmark your salary, find out what you're worth, or to discuss available tax roles, get in contact with James at the Tax Recruitment Company. His contact details can be found in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP83, or you can book a call with him by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. And also, if you're interested in the details of the Tax Advice Masterclass, then head on over to the show notes too, as you can find a link to more details about the masterclass there and also details on how to enroll. Chrissie is not alone when it comes to finding structuring tax advice hard, and she's not alone when it comes to not planning either before writing advice. But it's good to hear that she's starting to plan and that it has really helped her. Next in this episode, we will hear from Brandon. Brandon started his tax career in compliance, and compliance is still a large amount of the work that he does now, although he is getting more involved in advisory work as time goes on. Back when I first started the podcast, one of the first, if not the first message I ever received from anyone about the podcast was from someone called Angela Petty, who heads up the tax team at Botham Accounting, where Brandon works. She sent me such a lovely message, and I remember it being really encouraging in a time when I didn't know whether people would find the podcast useful or not. And as you'll hear, she is also great at supporting and helping her staff to develop. On to the conversation with Brandon. Can you just give us a little bit of an introduction about you, how you're involved in tax, where you're at with your career now, and so forth?
Yeah, so I got into tax when I went to university. So I was studying my undergrad at Durham. I was doing accounting and finance. And then we only really had one module on tax in my third year, my second year. And then basically I did that module, really enjoyed it, did a really good summative on that. I got 82% on that summative. And I was like, yeah, I've got to consider this as an option. So started applying after I got my degree, finished my dissertation, which I also based on tax. I found it really interesting and made me certain as to like what direction I want to go in with my career. And yeah, just started from there. Applied during COVID and got a place here. They started me off basically just doing tax returns. So my first day was literally like, oh, here's a tax return, see what you make of it.
Yeah.
So I got to play around with the software and the Excel sheets. And here I am almost 3 years later. I'm now assistant tax manager, so recently promoted. And that's just mainly because I'm managing so much of my own work and kind of carrying myself forward. So next step really is to, as we continue to grow, is for me to develop into advisory and maybe even client acquisition.
Okay, interesting. So you've only been in tax for 3 years at this point, you say?
Yeah,
Yeah. So are you CTA yet?
not CTA, no.
No. You doing that at the moment?
I decided to take a break from it. I figured I was doing exam after exam after exam. And I felt like after I got my ATT, I was thinking, I really want some more practical experience because with the exams and then busy tax season, I didn't feel like I was getting enough like high level training in terms of the fact. Mainly because I had so much on in terms of compliance. And so I figured if I stop CTA for a while, I can then focus on getting more experience in terms of advisory, which so far I found. And I feel like maybe in a year or two, I'll definitely be starting my CTA.
Yeah, it's a hard choice, isn't it? Because obviously CTA is great to cover on the CV, you learn a lot, but it takes up a lot of your time, like a lot of evenings, weekend time, and then you can't quite give as much at work as what you can when you're not doing it, I suppose. I'm sure you found that even by not now doing ATT, which is obviously significantly easier than CTA, but I bet you feel like you can dedicate a lot more now at work, right?
Yeah, certainly. Like, uh, I can do pretty much as I want to. Like, Angela asks me all the time if I want to be involved in different things, and not having that stress of, oh, I need to study 10
Mm.
hours tonight. Yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
just hangs over you,
it really
doesn't
does
it?
help.
So in terms of like your split of work then right now, 3 years in, started heavily in compliance. From the brief conversation we had before this, it sounds like that's still a big part of it. But like how much now is like tax advice? You're getting to do more of that. Yeah, what's it kind of like for you now that?
Yeah, so I'd say at this point in time, it's still quite heavily compliance based. So my working day is typically looking at the personal tax returns. We've not long come out of P11D season, so that was my focal point for a while. And when I say that I manage those areas, it's a case whereby I'm kind of seeing what needs to be done now and trying to preempt what clients need to be done next in terms of reaching out to them, discussing with them, maybe having meetings with them. So there's some elements within that itself whereby there's scope for planning. So I can, as you say, as you've done in your masterclass, I can I can say like I need to go back later potentially with any detailed advice. So it kind of blends together with the advisory side of things anyways. But any specialist advisory areas, so it would be a case whereby Angela's taken on a new client or she's having discussions with existing clients and they've asked for something interesting and she knows I'm interested, so she'll send me an email or just have a quick conversation with me, just regarding whether I want to get involved. And so when I get involved, it's typically a case whereby I'm allowed to have a little bit more time to do a lot of research into different resources and trying to formulate my own opinion. So what I'll typically do is if necessary, I'll draft any Excel sheets, or most of the time it'd be just an email of my thoughts
Hmm.
in a client-friendly format if possible.
So suppose then, I mean, if it sounds like it's very much early days, I suppose, where you're starting to now support Angela, who's the head of tax, I think, isn't she, your place, in
Yeah,
the advisory work that she's like managing by the sounds of it. I think you're like managing a lot of the compliance stuff, but she, it sounds like, manages the advisory side of things. Yeah,
certainly, yeah.
yeah. And it sounds like actually as well, which I always think is an interesting point because I very much think this is true, but it sounds like a lot of the advisory stuff is coming from the fact you're doing compliance work for them, because then you're able to see like an opportunity to help them with some advice or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah. When it comes to then like supporting on the tax advice work and maybe even drafting it yourself where you get that opportunity, what is it that you find most difficult, do you think, for you personally?
So I think the biggest thing is, as I've only really been in tax for 3 years, it's the case whereby some of the cases are covering stuff which I've never heard of. It's
Mm,
some subsection somewhere deep in the legislation.
yeah,
So it's having that kind of background expertise which you can't really force to have. It's really a case of experience that you need. And so the hardest thing sometimes is literally just knowing where to look and how to formulate an opinion which is modern and not just based on legislation. So I think overall the hardest thing is formulating opinion based on existing information beyond legislation.
yeah, which is difficult, right? And it, probably because you're still relatively new to tax, like the breadth of knowledge and say awareness of things that might be an issue as well. Guessing that's also ties into it too. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's only a few areas where I could say like I'm fairly strong with, but then if it ties into another area, it's a bit like, okay, I need a little bit of a hand with that, or
Yeah.
I need a little bit of guidance of where to look.
Yeah. So it sounds like actually then a large element of the support you're giving right now is related to the research and then formulating the opinion based on that research. And then I'm guessing Angela or someone else will take that and turn it into the piece of advice that's ultimately given to the client.
Yeah. So I'll give a very rough version of it. We'll have a few discussions,
Mm.
and then if it's good, she'll only make a few changes, and if it's needing a bit more work, she'll take what I've written and kind of rewrite it in her words, plus the additional elements that should be included too.
Yeah, that's actually sound like quite a good way to get introduced to it, because for me in employment taxes, we don't really have that opportunity of like getting gently eased into it, because as you will know, like from the compliance side of things, there's P11Ds, which happens once a year. And also our personal
Yeah,
tax team tends to deal with that at our place. PSAs comes around once a year. We do tend to deal with that in our team, but other than that, it's all advisory work. So we just have to like get chucked in completely at the deep end from day one. Whereas it sounds like you've been able to have a more gentle introduction to it because you've been able to get into the compliance side of things early on, become very good at that, and then slowly get dripped into the advisory side of things.
yeah, precisely. Yeah.
So what is it for you personally then that's made you like want to get better providing like tax advice in particular? Because it sounds like you're very solid on the compliance side of things.
So it's my goal in the long term is to get into kind of those senior roles, so senior management, even beyond potentially. So I think as part of that, you need to be well-rounded in what you can provide a client, even if in some areas it's just the ability to have a brief understanding so that you can at least talk about something. So alongside that is ability to provide specialist advice. And I think to be good at what you do in senior roles, having that very strong element of being able to provide advice to a very strong technical level is very important. So for me, it's kind of the case whereby I'm at the stage now where I feel like I can provide very good advice, um, full of technical details, but being able to provide that efficiently and with enough breadth of knowledge is probably the next stages as well.
Yeah. And I suppose after that as well, then you'll then be taking the knowledge, which is obviously the important part of it, but then turning into something that's very client friendly and that they can use and do something with as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Turn you more into that like well-rounded advisor type thing.
yeah,
So it sounds like you get very much a good training environment with Angela, actually, with the fact that how she's like giving it to you and giving you the feedback and stuff. But outside of that, what would you say that you've done like separate to that to help you become better at providing advice?
So outside of that, I've obviously recently done your masterclass, which is very, very good, provides a very well-rounded, I'd say knowledge base really for how
Yeah.
to master being an advisor. But then further to that, it's always been a case whereby I'm reading the ATT emails in terms of student bites or recent cases. Accountancy Daily, they send daily emails full of recent cases or anything really, which is good for like a more well-rounded knowledge. It's not always tax specific. Krona also send an email daily or multiple times a day, as you may know yourself,
Yeah.
in terms of any recent cases of updates to legislation, which is also really helpful.
Yeah.
And then I think with where we run things here is I'm quite free to, as long as I'm not taking too much time, I'm quite free to look into things if I want to. So with the way that we manage the compliance side of things with the tax returns, if I come across something which is like, I wonder what that means or what effect that might have,
Yeah.
I'm free to take 10, 20 minutes every now and then just to have a read into it, as long as it's going to be beneficial for what I'm doing for that client or even in the future.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of like constant element of refreshing my knowledge and trying to learn more where possible.
Yeah. I think the way you're doing it actually is very similar to me. Like when I was when I first started in tax, my involvement in advisory work was very much doing the research and, you know, feeding in from a technical perspective, because at that point I would not have written a good email to a client or advised particularly well, but I could find the answer and give a conclusion on it, which would be the right conclusion. It sounds like you're doing something very similar in a way. You get into getting involved in the research side of things. And on top of that, it sounds like you have an interest in the tax rules. You're just trying to build your knowledge and stuff. So then when clients come to you, you can give like a well-rounded piece of advice that considers more than just the question that they pose in front of you, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's that building the well-rounded knowledge really. I think that's the firm foundation to being able to be a good advisor really.
Yeah. I think it's the foundation that's absolutely needed. It's the knowledge first, and then I think you can add on the other things afterwards, like turning it into something that sounds nice for the client, or is written in a way that's commercial or whatever. I think it's very much steps, to be fair. You can learn a bit of all of it at the same time, but I do think focusing on the technical first until you've got a good ground in there, that's the right thing to do. Absolutely.
Exactly, yeah.
For other people then who are starting to get involved in advisory work like you are, what tips do you think you would give them?
So the biggest thing I think is not to be scared of if you see something and you've learned something in your technical lessons, for example, studying the ATT, don't be afraid to bring it up to your manager or your senior, because more than often I can imagine that they're more than happy to have a discussion with you regarding those things, and then I feel like that builds your interest and your confidence more. So I see that's definitely a key starting point. And then secondary to that is once you get to the stage whereby you're now, let's say, a bit more of a senior position, your knowledge is fairly up to scratch. Maybe even just asking your manager to get involved with advisory cases. I'm sure they're providing those opportunities anyways, but just chasing them, it kind of shows the manager that you're ready. And then, yeah, I'd say finally, third thing, I think something which from doing your master classes is it's a really good framework to use for when you're first starting to provide advice, especially if you've not really been in contact with clients before. It'd be quite intimidating to be writing lengthy emails or any reports without having really understanding of how to do them. So having a look at your masterclass, I'd definitely recommend.
So, like before that, then actually before the masterclass, had you ever written a report or got involved in that sort of things? Always like the extent of it, emails.
Yes, so the biggest things I typically do, I've written a business plan for an SEIS advanced assurance application
Okay.
because the client provided us with a big document, and basically it just needed to be reformatted and have a bit more information attached from the other files he had provided. I've written quite lengthy advisory emails, but then the feedback has been obviously trying to make that a bit more concise
Mm.
sometimes. But when things are a bit complex, it's difficult to do that. So it's been a case recently of trying to work on that. So improving my language to be a bit more concise, as you say, simpler and shorter sentences go a lot further. And then, I think another key tactic, which you've mentioned in your masterclass as well, is making sure that if you do need to send a long email, at least try to have a discussion with the client as well. So either by phone or in person, if preferable.
Makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For people who might be on the fence about whether or not to enroll in the masterclass or not, what would you like to say to them?
So if they're on the fence, I believe they're at a stage whereby they kind of want to get more involved with the advisory element of the job. I would say just go hop into it really, because ultimately it provides quite a condensed but detailed summary of how to really provide advice to a client. So even if you have some knowledge, even if you've got some experience, just having that as a resource, because you sent us a YouTube link as well, didn't you? Yeah. So you have access to that, not just on the day in which you teach us, but should you need it in the future just to reflect on. So basically, even if you've got the knowledge now, it's something you can always go back to should you need it in the future.
Yeah, I think actually, you couldn't come to the second live day, could you? So you had to watch the videos anyway. Yeah.
I was one of my hobbies is I like to get involved on TV sets
Ah.
as an extra, so I was just over there for a bit of filming.
What show was it or program?
It's a commercial training video, so I was in the background in all
Oh,
those.
okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do they still make those?
yeah, it's quite funny though, because I think it's hard to tell because they tried to not give you too much information, but it looked like a new wealth advisory firm. So it was just basically one of those like new starter training videos whereby, oh, I'm Jim, I'm new to the office.
Yeah,
Don't be
yeah.
like me.
Yeah, I can't believe they still do
Yeah.
those. It's like what used to. I don't know if you ever had this in school, but they used to like when I was in primary school. They used to like wheel out like a big TV and put you a video on. It reminds me of those
Yeah.
types. I didn't think they did them anymore because they're always super cringy. But it sounds like they're still doing them.
Yeah. And the funny thing was, it was in this big to rent office blocks. So it was like open plan as well. So they were like, in some of the scenes, they were shouting quite loudly.
Yeah,
And I wouldn't like to be someone who was actually working there during the day. All you can hear in the background is someone shouting at the top of the voice.
yeah. Oh, sounds fun. Very different from tax.
Yeah, yeah. It's something that I do because it's also yes, it's very different to tax. But I started at uni and I was like, it'd be nice to continue just as a hobby. And
Yeah.
the pay on the side isn't too bad as well. So
Show notes for this episode can be accessed at taxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP83. And there's all the links mentioned throughout this episode within the show notes, including a link to see the full details in the tax advice masterclass and also details on how to enrol. A huge thank you to Chrissie and Brandon for giving up their time to share their stories, and I'm thrilled, of course, that both of them have found the masterclass so helpful and that they were both so engaged during the live sessions. I've put a lot of time into creating this masterclass, and I've not seen anything out there that does something similar. I really wanted a strong focus on attendees taking away practical tips that they can start using straight away, and I'm glad both of these got exactly that. I have designed the Tax Advice Masterclass to give you everything you need to successfully develop your tax advice skills from a practical perspective. It covers what I'm calling the tax advice process with a deep dive into each element of that. It includes practical exercises that are gone through in the classes, as well as suggested homework exercises so that you can really embed and implement what you've learned. And it also includes real stories from my experiences so that you can get context and relate to that too. Full details of the masterclass can be found at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses, including how to enroll. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop, and improve your tax career. Until next time.